Welcome to the Cherish and Conquer Podcast, the show dedicated to celebrating female entrepreneurs' strength, resilience, and innovation. Be inspired by stories of women and what they cherish to help them conquer against all odds. Every other week, you will learn from remarkable women on how they navigate challenges, uphold their values, and create sustainable success. And now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Hello and welcome to the Cherish and Conquer Podcast. I'm Jessica Hartung on the show with me today, and we're going to talk about something I would dare to say is something we often don't consider. And when we start thinking about selling and making a difference and making an impact, it's critical. I mean, because business development is something we all have to do. And, you know, the old adage goes that, hey, we're all in sales because we're trying to sell our opinions, we're trying to sell our ideas, we're trying to sell our products and services. But, you know, how do you actually go about doing that is really where the problem is. And literally, there's thousands, if not millions, of pieces of advice. So Jessica is actually going to take and share her own personal experiences in regards to that and what she's learned along the way. So Jessica, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, thanks so much. Okay, so the question I like to ask is, in order to kind of get us down this path, and then, you know, we'll talk about this full cycle of conscious business development as a woman, is how are you actually making a difference in people's lives with the work that you're doing today?
Well, thank you for asking. I think that's one of the most fulfilling aspects of my work. You know, the piece that really matters to me is folks who are on the front line of doing leadership and are growing themselves from their jobs because their jobs need them to grow. You know, that there are demands out there in healthcare and in many different fields. The demands are incredible. And so when the difference that I like to make is to be helping those who are riding those waves of growth and development, get the most out of it and preserve themselves in the process. Because when we're hanging on that hairy edge of development, sometimes it gets a little tough, and folks need to take care of themselves so that they can have a long run. And so I've been really making a difference by helping individuals kind of take charge of their own individual development so that it works for them and works for their lives, and that their professional development is really about what they want to see happen in their career based on who they really are. So that feels really good, because when people are being themselves and doing what they really want to do, they tend to be people who want to make a difference. And so what we're doing is supporting those who are learning and growing how to make an even better and a bigger difference. And that, to me, is very satisfying.
So, and you use and like the word, you know, consciousness. If you can kind of explain that a little bit, and then I would like to go into the whole full cycle of conscious business development, as you know, as a woman. So, but explain the whole consciousness piece.
Yes. So the word self-aware, when you think of the word self-aware, do you know some people who seem to be particularly self-aware? They're not in a fog about who they are, and they're aware of how they show up and the energy they bring. And so they're conscious in the sense that they're aware of. There's a whole level of stuff that happens in all of human endeavors that operates at an unconscious level. We're just simply not aware of it. And sometimes that's a lovely thing. You know, we really need those automatic processes, right? You know, we don't want to have to think through every little thing. But when the autopilot becomes autopilot in our own sense of ourselves, we don't know ourselves. We haven't gone into some of those depths of exploration through our experiences. And so conscious means aware, and it also implies deliberate. When I'm making a conscious choice about what I'm going to be doing and how I'm going to be interacting with people, and what my values are and how I'm living those, when I'm making a conscious choice, it means I'm being deliberate in what I'm doing so that I am in a consistency, whether I'm in this setting or I'm in another setting, I'm being myself. And so when we talk about conscious, it's both aware and integrable, as in integrity with itself, in alignment with itself. So those are some of the things that I think about when I think the conscious professional. I wrote that book because I wanted people to bring more of who they really are to what they do for a job. There's so much more ways to be deliberate and thoughtful and enjoy more of our life at work. So that's been a long-term theme for me.
Well, as you say that, and then I think for me, I had an experience, and for those of you who might not be aware, I'm a baseball pitching coach at a high school, so I have the varsity and JV players, and one of the coaches, who's actually our catcher's coach, always likes to throw in a little bit of a piece of advice because he has a son that pitches and stuff like that, so he's been around it. And so I'm sitting there next to my pitcher who's throwing, and he says, "You need to do, this," which the advice was correct. But for me, I knew that we may have an interpretation problem. So it's like, okay, wait, stop. I said, when he says that, what are you thinking? And how do you interpret what he is saying? And thank goodness at that point his interpretation was correct. But I've had many instances where it's like, no, that's not what the intent, and that's not what the meaning, and that's not what the interpretation should be, because he only knows what he knows as far as the 17-year-old boy trying to throw the baseball. And so when we talk about consciousness and aware and and integrity, you may say, well, yeah, I was conscious of the decision. However, we don't often separate rational decision making and value-based decision making with emotional decision making. I was conscious and I made the decision and I was upset.
Right.
And so I've tried to have this conversation, and I even tried to get one of my kids to do it when they were trying to make a decision on what college they wanted to go to. I said, why don't you make a decision matrix? And they're like, what? I said, write down what you feel is very, very important to you. And then you need to weight those things in levels and degrees of importance. I said, because otherwise you start making an emotional decision, because you're not consciously aware of the things that are of value to you. So when you say conscious and conscious decision making, and talking about the dynamic of rational versus emotional, how do you help people come to better decisions of consciousness?
Well, it's really interesting that this example you've used, because it shows how we bring our professional development into our personal lives, and we bring our personal lives into our professional development. Here you are teaching your daughter how to use a decision matrix to do stuff in life, which it uses all of these transferable skills. Good management, good project management, thinking through goals, thinking through, using our brains in all of their good capacities. Brains are amazing and, useful for so many things. And what we tend to do with them in the course of the day it's not all that deliberate or that useful. So I think when we can be conscious as in aware of what we're paying attention to, what we're spending our time on. Here, we're looking at how is my kid making their decision? How can I provide a tool that would help them? What are some of the ways that we can spread this? And I think that really relates to being conscious of the context. I mean, it's pretty simple that there's things that are happening outside of you things that are happening inside of you, and things that are happening in the space where you and the outside are interacting. And in all of those domains, bringing a level of conscious awareness of who am I speaking to and what do they need from this interaction? What tools do I have in the whole of me, not just the ones that I learned on the job or as a parent or as a sibling, but how do I use everything I've got? And it really has come into the mission-driven folks who are naturally going to leverage everything we have towards something that, we're really trying to make happen, whether that's a small business or a nonprofit or something else that someone really cares deeply about. They're going to leverage their resources, their understanding, and their awareness. And so that ability to just sort of see a little gap like that and provide a little mentoring and coaching and instruction, what a gift. What a gift that you can see that. And there are a lot of other folks who are seeing that. They sometimes have the skills to mentor, but that's a whole area of skill building for those who are in their senior years in the career. They've been around for a while. They have a lot of knowledge. Doesn't mean they're good at conveying it. Doesn't mean that they have a way of speaking to a younger person and making it interesting. And those who are able to learn how to be a mentor and a guide, they tend to get a lot more opportunities to do that because people really need it. It's just that sometimes it comes in a form that they're not open to.
Want more insights from female entrepreneurs? Get complimentary access to Marina's Army for additional tips, tools, and tactics from this episode. Just go to mirina.ai and click Community for access. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Well, and let's be clear. My daughter was not open to it.
Fair.
Because when the day is all said and done, you're still dad.
Yeah. No, I really appreciated the example. And, I'm just going to interject here something that we'll see if it resonates. But after I wrote The Conscious Professional, there was one chapter that we were going to put at the end, and it didn't make it in. And I decided I would share it with some folks as kind of the last lost chapter. But it was about ethics. And what I guess really had come up for me is when we're talking about difference makers, when we're talking about folks who are trying to make the world a better place, we kind of have an easy way of putting them all in the category of honorable. And sometimes that's the case. But there are also, the title of the chapter is Opportunity and Ethics When People Aren't Trustworthy. And really, how do you, as a conscious professional, deal with others who are not conscious and are, in fact, perhaps predatory? So, I think that for me, and it's not an easy answer, I'm not, but I did want to raise that, is that I don't want folks to hear inside of my optimistic viewpoint about how valuable work could be, that it doesn't have trauma, that it doesn't have deep emotional issues that come up at work, because for a lot of people they do. And often they run right up against our ethics and our values, our relationships. There's a lot of fodder at work that it gets very intense. And so I thought that it was important for folks to know that, yes, we like to think about all being humans and equal, and we have to be an extra level of conscious about what game is this person playing.
Well, and I think that's even a balance within itself, because do I approach every single thing like that, and then am I too cautious and I miss out on certain opportunities? I mean, it's I think finding that middle ground balance to be able to leverage
Yes.
experience and wisdom, and then use it as, a calculated risk. I mean, that's where the benefit is. And can I tell you a little bit of a joke? Well, at least it's become one. When my wife and I first got married, we just celebrated our 30th a little while back. We went through thank you. We went through to a financial advisor, and he gave us a risk assessment. And we took the risk assessment. He came back after about 15, 20 minutes, grading it and stuff. And he looked at my wife and he goes, "You're more risky than he is." And she goes, "Ain't no way." She's a CPA. "Ain't no way that she goes, something's wrong with that test." And he goes, "Oh, I'm afraid so." He goes, "Because for you, when an opportunity actually presents itself, you're too cautious and won't take advantage of it." Wow. So it's being able to leverage the knowledge that's available to me, and in a conscious, separate out the emotion and rational, and, do all of that, to be able to assess, the risk of something, but you've got, and you can't take forever to go through that process.
Right. And even seeing opportunities, when we're looking from the perspective of how does this grow an industry, how does this change pieces, there isn't a zero sum that if you're taking advantage of that opportunities that others are missing out. I think looking for and creating opportunities that have that goodness built in, it really takes it to another level.
That's very true. Okay, so I want to make sure we do dig into, though, the full cycle of conscious business development as a woman, from startup through growth, succession, and exit. So,
yeah, I really want to talk about this because I've seen a lot over the years. So I started my third company in 1998. Before that was Teach, which was a Macintosh training and development company. And that only got a few years in. So most businesses, fail within the first 5 years. Many of them fail by year 10. I mean, it's getting to be a small number. So the fact that integrated work, which I started in 1998, is continuing on under new ownership, makes me really pleased. And it gives me a particular perspective, because a lot of the initiatives around women-owned businesses are around them starting them. And that's not where there's a problem. Women are very good at starting businesses. And one of the startup parts are some of the identity parts about, do I see myself as a business owner? In the corporate setting, I see a lot of folks considering, well, maybe I could go out on my own instead of being in a corporate job, but it seems really binary. It seems like a one or the other. And yet there are many sort of gray area opportunities where folks consolidate efforts and form companies in collaboration, or strategic ecosystems of businesses. So there's lots of different gradations on that range. But for the entrepreneur, being able to decide that you're a person who owns a business, that's a real identity shift for a lot of us. And I think there's a good reason for it. It was only 50 years ago that women were not able to have credit cards in their name and sign on loans. So there's a reason why identity-wise, we ourselves and others also have a kind of we have to see women businesses not just as startups, because when you're in that category of startup, you don't have a lot of power. You also are in the kind of Scrabble mode. So as you move past startup into a growth mode, different types of biases and issues come up. So one of them is that a lot of the professionals that I spoke with, accountants, lawyers, consultants of various kinds, I did some financial modeling. I had to educate them about how conscious businesses are run so that they could do their professional job in the context that I needed it. this was really hard. I had no idea how hard this was going to be. But it's like fighting from the inside for conscious business, because when you hire an HR consultant and you say, well, this is how we do it in my company, and they say, oh, no, you can't do that. That's not the way the state law works. You have to make some choices about how to be inside of all the legal aspects, but also to the spirit of your corporate culture. And so blending those, that's a part of growth. And what I really notice about this is a part of where women-owned businesses and the growth of women-owned businesses starts to influence industries outward. Because we're talking to folks and saying, no, we're not going to do it that way anymore. We want it to be this way. This is more respectful, and this makes more sense. So policies change, benefits change. You hear now about grandparent leave. Those businesses that have a corporate culture where they take that seriously are then influencing upward into the benefits world. So some of the other aspects of women-owned business, especially as they get into growth mode, it's not each individual woman-owned business that becomes a force. It's the collective. So then looking at succession and exit, I just have to tell you this part because it was fascinating. As a woman-owned business, I'd grown this business myself. My husband was 10%. I was 90%. And we became certified as a woman-owned business and had federal government contracts. What happens if you need succession planning and you have a federal government contract to a woman-owned business? Well, I think we really want to think about that. So there's the spirit and the letter of how that works. And what was really important to me in a succession planning was really hard for other people to understand. They couldn't understand why I had to do the things I had to do because they wouldn't see the context in which I was operating. And, okay, maybe that's a context that not many of your clients have yet dealt with, that they've gotten to the point where you have a woman-owned firm that has contracts because she's a woman-owned firm, and now we're looking at succession and eventual departure. So one of the things that was really important was understanding the valuation side of it, understanding our own values as a company, so that when we brought in somebody who shared those values and could help sculpt those values, they were able to take the company into a new chapter with new, different types of development. And even just the difference in our ages, I was 8 years older than her. The difference in our sense of capability, what we were networked into, what supports we used. She grew up at a time when a lot of women entrepreneurs were talking to each other and growing, businesses together. I grew up at a time when it was more isolated and everybody was kind of on their own. So even inside of women entrepreneurial cohorts, if you will, there are differentiators, and that's happening as our whole society is changing. And now with the changes that have happened post-COVID, where there's, I was originally going to write when I came in the end of 2019, and I came back to work from home, and I was going to write about conscious professionals at home, and how we are influencing outward from our houses into our families, into our communities. And that was before we all came home and had to stay there for a couple of years. So it's even more so now. But in any case, I wanted to share that process of figuring out how to have a succession plan that speaks to my values and that the real specific needs of this context, there's not a lot. And it's not the same for other companies that would look to sell a company. The ways they would look to maximize their profit would have diminish the value of the company, just even that in that process. So it was a big eye opener for me, how much education I needed to do so that the professionals could really be helpful to me.
That was priceless because a lot of the struggles that, regardless of founder gender, um, experience, is in that transition from startup to growth. That's one thing. And we essentially, from a society perspective, have always talked about, the exit. And some people will say, well, I'm not interested in doing that. I just want to, have my little, business here and run it, as long as I can. When I don't have to do it anymore, I can just shut it down. That's fine and dandy, but that's not always the case. That happens. I mean, sometimes some things click, they take off.
It's a big determination about a transferable enterprise or no. So there was, about 12 years in, I think it was about the time that I made that choice, is this a lifestyle business that will never be owned by anyone else, or is this a transferable enterprise? And when you reach that juncture and make that choice, there are, pretty different paths that ensue from that choice point.
Yeah. So the whole lifestyle and transferable piece, there are some key elements and practices that have to take place in both of those. Otherwise,
Exactly.
You're going to go crazy. And I would dare to say you probably have a wealth of experience in regards to that. So you still have to look at doing this regardless. Because I think part of that struggle and that transition piece is also where we start getting into taking on the responsibility for every single thing and getting overload and burnout and, the whole self-care thing. I mean, it's a downward spiral effect. But then, you even, when you started talking about the whole exit piece and certain elements associated with that, we do know that valuation can dramatically shift based on what the organization has done all along the way. And if you are sitting, for example, 20 years out, and now you're trying to make it a transferable business, as if you've been around, that's going to take you a couple of years to get to the point.
And now you've got the cultural transition and the transfer of trust, and where you've got a founder operator who then becomes just a founder, not an operator, who then becomes a non-owner, so that's a really good, solid, and, I tried to do practice. I work with folks in succession planning and help them plan. And one of my mentors, Frances Hesselbein, talked about having the first day on the job and how great that feels be the same as the last day on the job. And, how great that feels. And I thought, I really appreciate that kind of mentality about it. It's a much more mature look. And, the flip businesses that you're imagining, turning over just for a profit, and then you say you're a conscious business person who really cares about values, you have to say that fits in all of those different compartments of the conversation.
Yeah, very much so. Okay, so I would dare to say that you mentioned something about year 12, and then there was a flip for you. You have to visit that on a regular basis. I mean, to me, that's part of your annual exploration and strategy creation. It's like, okay, am I, is this still lifestyle, or is it transit? Is it a transferable, time? What do I need to do? And like I said, some of those things need to happen regardless of whether or not it's lifestyle or transferable, like standard operating procedures.
Yes.
Look, if you don't create standard operating procedures and figure out a way in order to be able to keep them up to date, you will eventually become extremely overwhelmed and you'll get burned out, and it's not going to be any business.
Right. And so then you develop them for yourself. And then if for some reason you decide later that it's going to be something that someone else does, then you'd update them and modify them, but you'd already have them. So there really isn't a reason to build it so small. You want to build it in a way that works for the individual running it.
Most definitely. Okay. All right. So can you share a story about a time where embracing feminine qualities or strengths helped you to overcome a challenge in your business?
I think one of the most challenging aspects of running a business that hires employees is managing those employees, and experiencing their life. When we had the floods in 2013, one of my employees lost their homes, and others were, evacuated for a while. And, so how do you as a business deal with that? And I think that as I would think about it from a feminine perspective, is you're taking care of folks. I'm cooking them dinner. I'm having them come in and use the shower at the office, and I'm doing things to support them in their lives because they're employees and I care about them. And that was a little bit of a different approach. Not everybody, it sort of took even our accountants some time to get on board with oh yeah, this is part of how we do business. There's nothing going wrong here. This is everything going right. This is what it looks like when we are really caring for our people.
So, I mean, how does that extend, and how does that connect? And you thinking about, the inspiration of operating a business, starting a business. You talked about multiple businesses. How does that align with the concept of cherish and conquer?
Well, the first thing that is one of the principles for me in business is that we're all humans and we're all peers in this experience of being human. So we're going through life as peers. And when you choose to see it that way, lots of other things seem to make sense. And so when I think about cherish and conquer, as a woman, there are many things that we cherish about the quality of relationships. And it's not a feminine only quality, but it's an important piece. I'm looking out for the growth of my employees, just like I'm looking out for the growth of other people that I care about. So you're cherishing an employee, the relationship between an employee and employer is a lot deeper, and it's a lot of work because you care so much about those folks, and you want to help see what's next on their path. And how can the work experience here provide for them not only a wage in return for their labor, but also a developmental path that makes for a better life? And because talent development is really my field, and workforce on the job workforce development, where I see it actually happening. It's not so much in training sessions. It's when people are doing the job and experiencing the challenges. So that's why I think the other part about Conquer is let's grow as we go. Let's grow as we go, because each of these phases, I got us to a certain point. Someone else takes the baton and takes us to the next point. I was benefiting from many other people who wrote down their lessons or shared their lessons with me so that I could start from where I began. And I think when we see ourselves conquering in a long term, what are we conquering? Probably our own limitations, limited belief sets, and the challenges that we face. Certainly, there are some people, as I mentioned in my chapters, who are not trustworthy. And it's true, there's some people who are not trustworthy of all genders. And we are conquering by being able to continue to make a difference, to be optimistic about the possibilities, and also to be conscious and aware that not everybody is operating that way. So we can choose how to be the way that is consistent with our values. And I really appreciate that workplaces have a discretion, like you can spend some time thinking about and working on your values when you're thinking about, how do I show up? How do I conquer my own, self-leadership challenges? So those are the ways that I see it relating.
I appreciate you sharing those perspectives. I mean, you hit on trust and trustworthiness, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because when we may have different interpretations when we say people aren't trustworthy. Are they not trustworthy because they have a developmental, opportunity, and that they haven't explored, the connections with their values and all of those things, and making the right decisions? It could be an age thing. It could be a background, an environment thing. But when you start talking about trust, how does that manifest itself, and what are your thoughts on that?
I'm really glad you asked that. And for listeners in this particular session, if you send me an email at jessica@jessicahartung.com, I will send you a copy of the last lost chapter as well as the first chapter. But the reason why this is really important is that, we often make excuses for folks, and we watch them do behaviors that we don't agree with or feel uncomfortable with, but, we're not really sure if this person is malintended. And so one of the ways that I have is really to look across multiple areas. So for instance, someone who doesn't respect the contributions of others on the team, they consistently don't look at what others have done to deliver. That's something you can notice. You can also notice when people make very little commitment to growing themselves, when they deny or avoid problems and issues rather than dealing with them. Or you frequently notice that they deliver work that's incomplete, late, or satisfies only the minimum requirements. Oftentimes, we find ourselves doing work for and continuing to accept the incomplete or undone work as just the way they are. But if they were going to be growing and developing, they would see these challenges as something that they could do something about and start to work on. So people who throw others under the bus and who don't make good judgments even after coaching. I think that the real kind of kicker is when you notice that someone is manipulating things to be in their own best interest that is not in the company's best interest. That's a pretty clear indicator that you have somebody who is not worthy of your trust, because their priorities and whatever they're using to make their decision matrix is not got the same things on it that you have on yours. And so you just want to be aware of that and not trust them to have your values in their decisions when they've shown repeatedly that they don't.
Thank you for sharing that. We might have to talk off mic.
Fair enough. Well, Jim, I hope that this has gotten at some of the things that you most wanted to hear about in terms of this podcast and what you want to convey. I was really thrilled to see that it was focused on how women have been breaking barriers. And, I found the books on my shelf are filled with women examples about building companies based in love, there's some excellent work, Margaret Heffernan, on a bigger prize around, the difference between competitive versus collaborative work. So I think that, gender aside, the feminine qualities of seeing some of the holistic understanding, the part where I'm most interested in the development of what is coming, the future of things, is in the ecosystem view, because I'm now saying, like one organization, that's like one person, that's like psychology. And business is really a lot more like sociology and ecology, where it's different businesses of different types interacting in ways that create benefit in the whole. And so when we can use ecosystem strategy to build businesses, we can be managing the impact, not as an afterthought, but as a part of the essence of the structure or the foundation of the business. And I think that's possible now. It wasn't possible previously. When I started my company back in 1998, people thought I was nuts, right? These ideas were not how folks, really, people told me, you're doing it wrong. That's not the way business works. Business works, the way that they had in mind. So we've come a long way.
Well, and as they say, we've just got started and there's a long way to go, right? So, let's build upon and share the experiences of somebody like you who's, been a pioneer and a trailblazer and, helping the next generation. And same thing, as far as I'm concerned is, it's an opportunity. I've always been, focused in on the underdog. Talking about my wife in 30 years, what I don't share very often is that she was in a car accident when she was 8 years old and she's been a paraplegic ever since.
Oh.
I've seen, unfair things occur and it's just not right. Goes against my principles and my values and things like
yes.
that. And so, you sharing these things is, critically important. And I still want, you to share a few other things. Like, for example, when you start talking about your business practices and the decisions you're going to make, even talking about, the acquisition, all of those types of things is, how does all of that align, or how do you keep it aligned with your core values and your ethics? How do you make sure that those two things stay together?
One of the biggest tools is not accepting that it can't be done. So when I started the process of trying to figure out how to transfer ownership, we had a lot of different discussions about that before we ended up on something that was workable. And, the first 3 or 4 people, male and female, just had different ideas about what should happen at this phase. And they weren't wrong. They were just different from what I needed. And so it was really hard to find folks who would listen long enough. And I, of course, don't have their area of expertise, in law or business valuation. So I can't tell them about what their role is and inside of that, but I need to orchestrate them on similar goals and values. Like, we're all operating on this same principle, and that getting everybody operating in those same principles is really hard. And it takes a lot of explicit time, and with all those folks, time is money. So you do have to pay your professionals to be to educate them to meet your needs. But I think that they also found it interesting. So it worked for them too, like those principles. But on a technicality, one of the things that we found that really worked for the business transfer was something called redeeming shares, which I didn't even know or think about. But in essence, after all the agreements and the various other things were worked out, in essence, I resigned and redeemed the remaining shares, and then did that in such a way that it was possible. We didn't have to have any bank financing or anything. It just was a loan from the company over time. So that created a very friendly, if you will, transfer of ownership, so that, everybody's invested in the success of the firm going forward.
Thanks for sharing that. So for those of you who are getting close to that exit, maybe need to look at redeeming shares, right?
Yeah, it was something new for me. And when I spoke at University of Colorado, we were talking about this. One of the senior students raised his hand and said, "I've never heard of that." I said, "I'd never heard of it either." That's the thing, is you can't stop learning, because when we have new new issues because we're thinking about business in new ways, then we want to be bringing their values first, and then the mechanisms serve the purpose rather than our purposes having to fit inside of these mechanisms that don't work.
Enjoying the show? After joining Marina's Army, subscribe and share the Cherish and Conquer podcast on your favorite platform. Thank you. Now, back to the show.
Yeah. So, I mean, and some people may refer to that as, like out of box thinking, but it's a little bit different than that when you actually start getting into the whole thinking process. It's being, congruent, versus
Exactly.
And so the exploratory and all of those types of things. And so when I look at, where you are and where you're going, I'm going to look forward to have you going through our breakthrough blitz, which is our rapid fire questions. So, are you ready to actually go through? You've helped us a ton with a lot of breakthrough insights. Are you ready for the breakthrough blitz?
I'm ready for the blitz.
All right, here we go. So what's your favorite productivity tool or app?
Brainwaves. It's a Brainwaves app.
Brainwaves app. Okay. So what's your favorite way to unwind after a busy day?
Walk with the dog.
If you could have dinner with any female business leader, living or deceased, who would it be?
Boy, I would definitely have a dinner party with some of these great diversity, inclusion, and philosophy folks. I'm thinking of, anyway, there's a whole group of them I would love to have dinner with. I think there's some really innovative thinking. And Margaret Heffernan is one of my heroes, Shiros. I would love to have dinner with her.
And what's your favorite quote or mantra that keeps you motivated?
To serve is to live, by Frances Hesselbein.
And what is one piece of advice that you would give to aspiring female entrepreneurs?
Your authentic ambition, what's genuinely true for you, is unique and valuable and worth it.
This is my last breakthrough blitz question. So what's the biggest misconception that people have about being a female entrepreneur, and how do you address it in your own experience?
The biggest misconception is it's important to have good work-life boundaries. And the way I address that is through integration. It's important to have great work-life integration that has a flavor that you, just the way you like, the morning coffee with the emails, if that's what you like, the conversation with the husband over, strategy or whatever it is. It's a unique combination and integration of work and life.
Jessica Hartung, I appreciate everything that you've shared with us and are still yet to share. But if you could, for now, please share how the Cherish and Conquer listeners and watchers can connect with you.
Oh, yes. Well, I have so enjoyed this conversation. And if it has appealed to you, I'm going to make this very simple. I would love to have you send me an email. I will send you the first chapter of the Conscious Professional book and the last lost chapter about opportunities and ethics. At this point, I'm just happy to have emails. I can handle that, and it's fun to connect with folks individually. So feel free to do that. It's just jessica@jessicahartung.com. And, I've been doing some speaking about the book. I've been doing some book clubs with organizations, and that's just really been a fun way for me to bring into an intact organization these ideas. And so, anyone who wants to talk about that, I enjoy that very much.
Jessica Hartung, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for tuning into the Cherish and Conquer podcast from Marina. Join our community of trailblazing women at community.marina.ai and get access to exclusive resources, checklists, and guides. If you found value in today's episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share it across your social platforms. See you soon, and remember, barriers are for breaking.